Well, welcome. We are the University of Miami's Mindfulness Initiative, and our mission for this initiative is to do exactly the kind of thing we're doing today, to increase the footprint and grow the opportunities for us to practice mindfulness and other forms of contemplative practices, as well as to engage in rigorous research and scholarship along this enterprise. And I'm very pleased to announce that actually last night we just began the launch of our movement toward the development of a Mindfulness Center. So we want to go from an initiative to actually having a formal status within the university that will allow us even greater opportunities to do this kind of work. So I'm very excited about that. And I wanted to also mention to you all that, stay tuned. If you aren't on our mailing list, if you haven't gone to our website, we're mindfulness.miami.edu, so you can learn a lot more about what we're up to. All right, so we're going to, Sharon, are you comfortable getting there? Okay, so we're doing some adjustments. And as we're doing those adjustments, let me just say a couple things housekeeping-wise for our 2 days together. Everybody knows it's a 2-day non-residential retreat, which means you do have to go home at the end of the day. All right, well, the first thing I want to say is make sure you're comfortable. And, we've set up the room in a way that we thought might work, but this is all pliable, playable, and move as you feel comfortable. The entire room is available to us, so if you want a corner, if you want to move chairs around, please feel absolutely free to do that now or at any point during your time together with us. Also, I want to just kind of initiate the spirit of community and taking care of each other. So be mindful of those around you, be sensitive to how your comfort level might be impacting somebody else's comfort level, etc. In fact, the entire weekend we're going to be spending talking about connection. So this is going to be a growing theme for our 2 days together. All right, other things that might be good reminders, if you have a cell phone, I'm sure there's not a person here who doesn't, please put it on silent mode, or actually I strongly recommend that you turn it off. Just take that opportunity right now. Make yourself unavailable for the day, except to yourself. I think many of you who know this space may know, and for those of you who are new, the bathrooms are located just directly opposite to where we are now, just down the hall. And we are going to, as is typical on day-long retreats, we're going to have periods of walking, we're going to have periods of sitting. And for the periods of walking, remember this is a university campus and there are other people driving around, walking around, biking around, and they're not always used to people walking slowly like the night of the living dead. So if you're doing walking practice, I ask that you really maintain your walking space within the kind of perimeter of this building. So there's a beautiful courtyard right out here, there's a space in front. Do not go anywhere near the parking lot. Even the sidewalk of the parking lot, I would avoid just for safety concerns. There's also, obviously, the internal spaces of the building you're welcome to walk in, as well as the hall. Is that clear? Okay, great. Let's see. Oh, yes. So the reminder they've given me is that don't try to go out those doors, because I guess an alarm will sound and all of us will be alerted. So just use the main doors that you came in and out of. All right, so a couple other things. They told us that they want to really, the facilities folks wanted us to, and I think we said this in the note we sent out, they don't want us to have any food in this room, in this space, so there will be an official lunch break around 12:30 or so. And at that point, I think you got, or there's some out there, flyers on local venues for you to pop out and get some food. If you brought your lunch with you, wonderful. Just try to find a beautiful space outside. We had a lovely day today, so feel free to take a walk and have your lunch somewhere around, but they don't want us to have food in this room. Okay? In terms of the schedule for the day, I've left it up to our guide. Sharon will be telling us sort of when the periods of walking, sitting, etc. will happen. We're approximating around 12:30 for our lunch break. And as she will also tell us, I just want to set the kind of stage for this, is that we really are going to treat this like a true retreat. So in addition to setting the intention to really fully be present and honor ourselves for the day and each other, we want to honor and keep the custom of noble silence. So Sharon, make sure that you please remind us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind, as we're setting our intention. But we really do want to keep sort of the ground rules of a retreat so we can really maximally benefit in our time together. All right, does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to my wonderful colleague and the co-director of the Mindfulness Initiative, Scott Rogers, who will introduce Sharon.
Thanks, Amishi. And so in the spirit of noble silence, I will use noble silence to introduce our speaker. And maybe a little more than that. But in theory, could it really get better than that? Right? In theory, maybe in practice, could it really get better than that? It's wonderful to be together. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to come together and practice. For some of us in this room, we were here before. Maybe you were here a couple of years ago and Sharon last was kind enough to come and spend 2 days with us to support your mindfulness and to support our community and to help support each of us in our individual practices. I want to just say a couple of things about Sharon that you probably know, because it's nice being reminded of wonderful accomplishments and achievements, but also something else that I think is especially poignant and meaningful as it relates to our time together today, and having Sharon here in particular. You know perhaps that she's a New York Times best-selling author of a book, Real Happiness, a really extraordinary book. If you don't know that book, I strongly encourage it. Other books in the spirit of that real, I mean really finding the heart of what's real in life that we oftentimes can miss. Real happiness at work, an environment where sometimes we can forget the real gift of the people with whom we're with and the circumstances that can seem challenging and are, but maybe are much more than that. Real love, which brings us here today, and I think real love, in fact, brings us here today. Faith, an extraordinarily wonderful memoir that if you're not familiar with, you might want to become, and other wonderful books. So there's that. There's the contribution she makes monthly to On Being, and you're perhaps familiar with the Pivot and that wonderful series that you contribute to very importantly, and just lots of other groups and organizations that she has supported, like ours, and done a lot. But in the next 2 days, we have this very, this opportunity to be with someone. Sharon may tell you at some point that she went to college in New York, etc. She may not tell you that she was 16 when she did. Now, why I think that's especially meaningful is because she went to India shortly thereafter. So here's somebody who at a very young age went off to India to learn with and to seriously immerse herself in the practices with teachers who are no longer among us. The living teachers that she's our link to them. But at the same time, she is a living master. So she both has that from her experience, one that many of us will never have that direct opportunity, and yet at the same time she is a master of embodying and sharing that very wisdom and the heart of what life is all about, which is of course what Sharon is very much about. Her name, Sharon, and sharing are probably not, seriously, not without reason. And so we can read wonderful books, we can watch wonderful videos, we can go to retreats and have personal practice, but when we find a teacher, and you probably know this from your own experience, it's something very special when there's this teacher. And we're a small group here. I mean, large in some ways, but small in other ways. And so I'm keenly aware of the fact that this moment is fleeting. These moments are fleeting. Lunch will come before we know it. The end of the day will come before we know it. Tomorrow will come, and the end of tomorrow. Hopefully we'll all still be on this earth during this time frame. I say that seriously, because we can forget the way life plays itself out. And so there's a preciousness to this moment. There's a preciousness to your being here, and there's a preciousness to what it is that we have an opportunity together if we really pay attention. And if our heart is as open as you will help us open it, and we will each help each other open it, that is,
Hello. There I am. Yeah, I'm on, right? Yeah. Wow, thank you. That was beautiful. And it's the second time here that in South Florida, where I am, that Scott's introduced me, and he just gets more and more beautiful. And I told him last time that I was going to take him with me wherever I went. So now I'm really like, wow. And thank you, Mishi, for your invitation and bringing me here. Now I remember the room. Now that I'm back here, I remember the room. So it's been like 2 years, I think, since I was here. And it's wonderful to be back. So, and it's especially moving to me to be here at this point in the growth and the evolution of this idea becoming an institute, becoming a center, becoming a refuge for many, many people. This is also, in terms of the center, I co-founded the Insight Meditation Society. This is our anniversary season. We moved in on Valentine's Day of 1976. And we're still there, still flourishing. So I was 23 at the time. My colleagues, my friends, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, were older than I, but not that much older than I, 6 or 7 years older than I. And we had each, Jack in Thailand and Joseph and I in India, spent years just studying and practicing. And we didn't know anything, really. In all truth, it was kind of like, what's a mortgage? And how do you get one? In fact, we couldn't get one. There was no bank that would give us a mortgage. We bought, in the end, we bought this property in Barre, Massachusetts, which slept, even then, maybe 100 people, plus there's the meditation room and kitchen and dining room and offices and 80 acres of land for $150,000, which we didn't have. This is 1975, So it was a Catholic novitiate at the time. We bought it, run by the Fathers of the Blessed Sacrament, and we raised $50,000. The Fathers gave us a $50,000 mortgage, and there was no bank that would give us the next 50. So 3 very brave people went off to the bank and personally got loans so that we could actually buy the property and begin. And really, that was brave in those days, It was like, what's meditation? I never heard the word mindfulness used before. What is it? It was really different. And so we began. So this is actually a very kind of nostalgic period of time or season for us always, and really remembering stepping into the unknown and being pioneers. And what's funny is that we all are still pioneers, because there's so few models for kind of creating organizations and networks and communities in this country that reflect kind of the multitude of cultures here and values, and have the instruction and the methodology be really directly linked to what is by now an ancient body of knowledge. Because I am so much more identified in the eyes of the world with loving kindness than anything, and a lot of that we'll emphasize today. But still, of course, I teach a lot of mindfulness and other practices, which we'll also do today and tomorrow. But once I was teaching a non-residential weekend somewhere, and it was a loving kindness weekend, and somebody came up to me and said, "This stuff is incredible. When did you make it up?" So, I didn't really make it up, none of it, People have been practicing these techniques, these methods, in many a tradition for thousands and thousands of years. But here we are with the opportunity to see how do you express it now? And what do you point to now? You know, culture is different, and conditioning is different. So it's a very exciting time also in doing that. And really it was stepping into the unknown, and probably it always is. And I'm thankful for the people who really inspired us and goaded us to make that kind of movement. And for the fact that I see it, you know, just happening in such a generative way. It's really great. So many of you have heard me, no doubt, tell the story or read, you know, stuff I've written where I talk about that moment when we decided to buy that particular property. Before then, we were living in California because somebody offered us what was really his like rental property, you know, and he said, why don't you just move there? Thereby getting us out of his living room. And this was outside of Santa Cruz, California, and we opened up this house as a kind of mini retreat center, which was the life we were most familiar with. And somebody came through, he was writing a book. And he came through and he said, you know, I think you folks should really open up a real retreat center. And I know the people who can help you, they're all in Massachusetts, which was correct, there were other people. And we just thought, oh, that sounds interesting, let's try that, you know. So we went back to the East Coast and we looked up and down the East Coast for a property. And finally, Catholic Archdiocese direct, they were selling a lot of property then. We were in the midst of what we quaintly called the gas crisis, right? Big properties, expensive to heat, and growing increasingly expensive to heat, so they're selling a lot of stuff. So we went to look at this place in Barre, Massachusetts in December of '75, and we just couldn't decide what to do. Joseph Goldstein, Jack Cornfield, and I had not been back from Asia all that long. It was such a mystery how many people would ever be interested in meditation here, or this particular form or forms of meditation. And we looked at the building, we thought, it looks big, you know? And yet, on the other hand, it seemed really perfect. It's a beautiful place for a retreat center. It's 2.5 miles outside of the town of Barre, Mass. It's really quiet, it's really pretty. So we went to downtown Barre to try to decide what to do. And Barre's a very classical New England town with a town green in the center of it. And in those days, there was a monument on the town green which had engraved upon it the Barre town motto, which is tranquil and alert. So we took a look at that, tranquil and alert, and we said, okay, that's an omen. Because any town that has a motto like that should have a meditation center. Because when we talk about meditation, really in any methodology, and we're going to experiment with several, we're talking about deepening calm, tranquility, peace, relaxation, but we're also talking about increasing energy and awakeness and awareness and connection, right? And interest, right? And we're talking about the balance between those two. This is really at the crux of, you could almost say, the technical side of meditation. We look at balance in these direct ways, right? We're calming down and we're waking up, we're enlivening. It's not really the same as just taking a nap. You know, in which case you can just take a nap, right? Because there's also that energized, aware component. But it's not just being aware, which can lead us to be really hyper, right? It's also got those other effects. So we said, okay, we use terms like that all the time. The essence of the technical application is the balance between those two things. Let's buy it. So we did. And the rest is history. So I said all that because we're going to come back again and again to this issue of balance. So how many of you feel like you're new to meditation practice? You've never really done much. Okay, great. So we talk about balance in ways big and small, especially in a topic like love. We talk about and we explore, even without words sometimes, we explore balance in some immense sort of ways. Like, what would be the balance between love and compassion for ourselves and love and compassion for others? What would be the balance between compassion for somebody and realizing, I can't fix it. It's not up to me. What's the balance between having love and compassion for someone just as a human being and realizing I disagree so vehemently with your actions or your point of view that I'm just going to fight, but perhaps not from a place of hatred, right? So we look at balance in immense ways, and we work with balance in this immediate way. Because the resolutions, the answers, the clarity around these issues is said to come when our being is in balance, right? And there's just this movement into intuitive understanding or seeing things differently or a different kind of embodied wisdom. Sometimes we don't even have the words, but we kind of know what that feels like to have that sort of balance. Now, balance itself, we're going to talk a lot about terminology today and tomorrow. Love, loving kindness, equanimity, compassion, are all words with layers and layers of meaning. And so equanimity is a sort of odd term. It means balance. As used here, it doesn't mean indifference or apathy or coldness or removal. It means perspective. It means balance. So balance itself is a word I'm often not that fond of. I think it sounds like mediocrity. It's like you don't go too far in that direction, too far in that direction. You just kind of there in the middle. But I was part of this 4-year program for a while at this place called the Garrison Institute in Garrison, New York, and I was bringing tools of yoga and meditation to domestic violence shelter workers. And then after 4 years, the Garrison Institute itself decided they wanted to change that program and make it more international and try to bring those tools to international humanitarian aid workers. So in the course of that transition, everything had to be rewritten. All the language had to be sort of re-looked at. So they hired a marketing team to work with them on that change. And I remember being in a meeting with the marketing team, and I said, I know it's not an exciting word, I know it's not even really an appealing word, and it sounds so dull, but the state we're talking about trying to help people move more toward is one of balance. And the whole marketing team just laughed at me. And somebody said, you know who considers the word balance a really good word? Anybody who feels like they're out of balance. They said, that's practically everybody. We think it's a great marketing term. Okay, so we're going to come back to these issues of balance. Mutuality in love. Not forgetting yourself, even as you're offering. Remembering there are boundaries. There's reality about what we can do and what we can't do. so many ways this issue comes back, and as we make this exploration. So we're going to sit in just a minute to begin and just more fully arrive. The retreat topic is real love, which is the title of my, I'm schooling myself not to say my last book, because I don't think it will be. This is about signing book contract. Being the first to know. But it's my most recent book. And the book was born actually out of one line in a movie. The movie is called Dan in Real Life, and it's about 11 or so years old. My goddaughter had a part in the movie. She didn't have any speaking lines, but she barked. Because she was really a little girl then. And in the movie, there's a talent show, and that's her audition. So that was her audition for the movie. She had a bark. And she barked well, I guess. She got in. So the line from the movie is, love is not a feeling, it's an ability. Love is not a feeling, it's an ability. I got into some trouble with some editors over that, because they said, of course love is a feeling. I mean, this is Valentine's Day coming up, right? We're supposed to have started feeling it last week. And, you know, it's like compulsory in February. And it's the feeling we're taught to yearn for and want and, you know, do anything for, all kinds of conditioning. But what if you started thinking of love mostly as an ability, a capacity inside yourself? That's different. And as soon as I heard the line, I realized how much it mirrored my own experience in meditation practice, especially doing loving kindness practice, where I realized that before certain changes in my own view, my own experience, I did see love mostly as a feeling, as a commodity, which meant it was in someone else's hands. And they might bestow it upon me, and they also might take it away from me. And if this other would take it away from me, I'd have nothing. I would just be bereft. But when I saw it as something within me, it was mine. Others might ignite it and inspire it or threaten it, for sure. But it's within me, ultimately. And it's something that I'm responsible for, tending, awakening, nourishing, expressing in some way. And I thought that's so much in accordance with my experience. Before then, it really was, the image I like to use is, it was like the UPS person standing at my doorstep, looking down at the package, looking at the address and saying, I don't think so. And just going away. And I'm like, wait a minute, that I have nothing. I have no love. But if it's within me, it's within me. And I can appreciate and seek or whatever those that will bring it more to life, but it's mine. And that's the basis of the meditation practice. So we're going to do an arc of practice while we're here. Some concentration on the breath and mindfulness practice to kind of settle and arrive more fully, and to see the threads, particularly of self-compassion, as we're working in those ways. We're going to do loving kindness practice in the more formal sense, both sitting and in movement. Actually, when you do loving kindness practice walking, you don't have to slow down. So we have kind of double insurance against you looking excessively weird, because you really don't need to slow down. We are going to practice noble silence, which means you can always talk to me if you have a question or whatever. I'm assuming you can talk to Amishi, Scott, you know, if you need help with something. If you go out for lunch, you can talk. Once I teach sometimes in London, and the the organizers, they rent a school because it's the weekend. And one year, a brilliant person set up an espresso truck in the schoolyard. Brilliant. And unfortunately, I didn't know that until I went out, so I didn't say to people, you can just place an order. So these poor women, you know, everyone was like gesturing and doing like charades and like, but it was my fault because I just didn't know, you know, so you can order your lunch, you can, you know, we'll consider that like kind of time off. If you can keep this area really quiet, then whoever comes back and wants to practice, you know, has that environment that we're all co-creating. Many times, you know, people will come to a place like the Insight Meditation Society where the retreats are silent, except for contact with the teachers. And the thing they dread the most is the silence. People come and say, I don't know if I can be silent for 3 days. Oh, you can also talk to me at home tonight. I don't know if I can be silent for 3 days or 2 days, whatever it is. Or people come and say, my partner doesn't think I can be silent. Once one woman came and she said, we're doing a betting pool in my office. Because they don't think I can be silent. And almost always, at the end of the experience, it's the part that people point to as just about the most beautiful. Because it's like, for once in our lives, we don't have to present ourselves to someone else as interesting or profound or funny or anything. We can just be. And what a great gift to give to oneself. So experiment with it, see what it's like in those ways. I don't know if you've ever had the experience that just came up in my mind where sometimes it's rare, but it happens where I don't have access to my phone, my iPhone. And then I'm so excited that I get it back and we turn it on and I'm going to see all the email and it's like totally useless for the most part. And I'm deleting. Why was I so excited? And I missed it so much. There's like nothing there. Right? It's a little bit like that experience. And let me just experiment with simplicity, with letting things go, with being somewhat quieter. And we're so unused to that now, right? You think about the last time you were waiting for something, crazy. We're always, and me too, we're always like that. So, let's see how simple we can get, just directly with our own experience, and have fun with it. It's its own weird kind of fun, to kind of go against the flow of the brain, you know, of a common experience in that way. So meditation practice, as a repeat for those of you familiar with it, really is like a skills training. It's attention training. And whatever technique we're using, we are developing some degree of steadiness or stability of attention. So we're not just spinning constantly in the past and the future and judgment and speculation, but we have that sense of groundedness, of presence. We are practicing mindfulness, which means cultivating an awareness that allows us to see things more clearly, more cleanly. There's a word in Pali, which is the language of the original Buddhist text, which I think about a lot. I like it a lot as a word, because I think it's like one of those words that sounds like what it means, papancha. I think it sounds like popcorn. And it means proliferation. Or as I heard one translator once described it as the imperialistic tendency of mind, where something happens and the whole world is taken over. So this is the example I tend to use. I was teaching with my friend Joseph Goldstein somewhere once. And we were sitting in the kitchen having a cup of tea. And this man came into the kitchen and said to Joseph, I just had this really terrible experience. And Joseph said, well, what happened? And he said, I felt all of this tension in my jaw. And I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am and how I always have been and I always will be. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he said, yes, and I've never been able to get close to people and it's never going to change. And Joseph said, you mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw? And he responded with some very elaborate story about forevermore. And I was sitting there watching him go back and forth and back and forth. Finally, Joseph said, why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's painful enough, and genuinely so, to feel that tension in our jaw. But on top of that, we now have, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life. So one of the ways we describe mindfulness sometimes is we look for the add-ons. It's not that you're going to greet the 10 straw and think, oh good, you know, so much learning to be had here, or anything like that. It hurts, but we don't need the extra suffering, right? A feeling we failed, of blaming ourselves, of being ashamed, of wanting to hide, feeling so isolated with the pain, whatever kind of pain we may be feeling. So mindfulness allows us to experience pleasant, beautiful, joyous, wonderful things and actually experience them. Rather than sometimes something really good happens and we grab it, but how do I keep it? So we're consumed with worry, we're not actually enjoying it. Or we can have several strange relationships to the joy that comes our way, including feeling we don't deserve it, and thereby avoiding it. And we realize we can have a very distorted sort of relationship to pain. Physical pain, emotional pain, heartache, disappointment, heartbreak. Where rather than responding with compassion, which is possible, compassion for ourselves to begin with, we respond with all of the lists I had just said earlier, shame and blame and feeling we've lost control and seizing on what's happening as though it's here forever, completely identifying with it, and we don't have to. Right? That's the training of mindfulness, to be also with painful feeling, difficulty, stress, differently. And it's also, meditation is also considered a training in loving kindness or compassion. And, we're going to start with a kind of more formal mindfulness technique. But even there, I really feel that love or loving kindness and compassion are like the secret ingredients. Because I don't think it's possible to successfully execute something like meditation of any kind without also kind of quietly deepening compassion for ourselves, even if we don't notice it or know it consciously. So this is the technique we're going to do. This is the first technique I ever heard when I went to India to learn. That is, just sit down and feel your breath. Feel the actual sensations of your in and out breath. Wherever, I'll go through it again, but wherever it's most clear to you. The nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. You find that place, bring your attention there, and rest. The word is rest. Sometimes people, in contrast, for example, think that if they can get like a stranglehold on the breath, their minds won't wander, and they'll actually wander more. We rest our attention on the feeling of the breath, wherever the breath is clearest or strongest for you. And we feel the actual sensations. You can sit comfortably with your back straight. Close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Find that place where the breath is clearest for you, maybe the nostrils, the chest, or the abdomen. Bring your attention there and rest. If you like, you can use a quiet mental notation of in, out, or rising, falling to help support the awareness of the breath, but very quiet. So your attention is really going to feeling the breath, one breath at a time. What happened before, it does not matter. And you don't have to get ready for even the very next breath. It's just this one. And if images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on through your breathing. It's just one breath. But if you find that your attention wanders, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the most important moment in the whole process is the next moment, after you've been gone. It's the moment of recovery, of return. Gently letting go of whatever distracted us, shepherding our attention back to the feeling of the breath. That's the critical moment. And if you have to do that over and over again for the next few minutes, that's fine. That moment after you've been gone is the moment of self-compassion. Instead of judging yourself or blaming yourself, you see if you can let go and then return. And I just want you to pay particular attention to how you speak to yourself when you realize your attention has wandered. And if it's pretty harsh, see if you can soften it. And then begin again. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze. So thank you for that. It's different, isn't it? When you're more here. So I thought we could take a break now, a silent break. Just before we begin again, we'll do questions then tune into a breath or tune into some obvious sensation like your feet touching the ground. Not in a tight, exclusive focus trying to block out anything else, but just to feel. And that'll be the preparation for kind of movement meditation. So I would love to hear from you. This is not a time you need to be silent. If you have any questions about your meditation practice, certainly anything you just experienced, any comments. And I'd also like to hear, or you don't have to do everything, but I'd love to hear from you kind of what associations you have with the word love. Some people think of it, here it is, it's almost Valentine's Day, in a very romantic sense. Or some people think of love as a great strength, a force, a power. Some people think of love as something that kind of weakens us, and confuses us, and has us get sort of timid and almost like sick and sweet. My first book, the first book I wrote was called Loving Kindness, and I have a friend who said, he told me he used to read it on the New York City subway, and he was so embarrassed to be seen reading a book called Loving Kindness that he used to cover the title. And first I thought, wow, he's using his fingers to cover the word loving kindness. But then I took another look at the book cover, and it's kind of big letters. And I thought, oh my God, he's really covering the cover. It's like pornography or something. I thought, isn't that interesting? Very possibly we wouldn't be embarrassed to be seen reading a book like, savagery amongst people, or like, step on everyone on your way to the top, or whatever, But loving kindness, it's like, that's like, that's sentimental. So it's interesting, I think, always for me to hear, the kinds of associations we have with a word like love. So if anybody, I guess we'll go around with the microphone, or how we do it. If I can hear, okay, I'll try to, well, it's actually better if we could have a microphone, because otherwise it won't be heard. And not everyone may be brief, although that would be really nice in terms of my trying to repeat it. We can all take turns with the microphone.
Good morning.
Hi.
So nice to be here with you.
Thank you.
My name is Crystal. I would say my definition of love has evolved. At a younger age, I did perceive it as that feeling. And I think getting married, having my son almost 2 years ago, and getting more familiar with mindfulness and experiencing what that's like has really changed my definition. And I see it now more as a connection. So I think it's a connection.
Thank you.
I like loving kindness. It's sort of something
Can you
that...
go a little closer?
Loving kindness is something that has been more accessible for me through learning about meditation and the idea of metta. But love has been a very tricky concept, and I think it's sort of taking sort of a cultural perspective or narrowing of that idea of metta that has always kind of eluded me. So,
Great, yeah, thank you.
So I want to build upon connection, the word connection. because that was really the first word that came to me as well. When I think about love, it's really the ability to connect with all sentient beings, really. But first and foremost, I think for myself, I had to learn to connect with myself in order to really truly be able to feel it. And feel it even for those, as you mentioned, you don't necessarily care for in that way. So that's love for me.
Thank you.
Ed, first comment on the concept of noble silence. Observation was so interesting during the break, how difficult it was for me not to not speak to anybody, because I really don't know anybody in here, but not to take out my phone and check my emails and make a call that can certainly wait, you know. And the other concept on the concept of love, and it being an ability, what strikes me, first of all, in my growing up, you know, at my age, men don't have feelings, you know. We're not supposed to feel, and how many times do we hear the comment about a movie, oh, you know, you wouldn't like to see that, that's a chick flick, you know, because, you know, again, we don't have feelings, but presently now, going through the experience, personal experience of loving, the biggest reaction for me now, different, is your comment, it's an ability, and it's the ability to allow myself, most of all, to be vulnerable. And I think that's one of the most difficult things about being able to love, is being able to allow yourself to be sensitive and vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hi.
Who are you?
I'm right here.
I was teaching with somebody, I can't remember who, because I always have trouble locating the sound. And I said to the person I was teaching with, who must have been a doctor, I said, is that a disorder? And he said, yes. So you have to help me. I guess I have a disorder.
So to the concept of love, I find it to be really fascinating because it's something I relate to a lot, but at the same time I find it very puzzling. And the reason I find it so puzzling is because of the ambiguity and the wide latitude that we use the word love with. So love can refer to the most absolutely profound experiences we have. Love for your child, love for your partner, you know, profound love for all beings, but also, I love ice cream.
Yeah.
I love the Philadelphia Eagles, you know what I mean? Like, and I wonder, like, how does this latitude either dilute or distort the intention and significance of love? And is there a way we can speak more carefully or more carefully elicit these ideas?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Love has many definitions, and I think that when we use the word love, we probably all mean different things, and we certainly use it in different meanings at different times. For me, love is an environment that I can create for myself, and I like to live within it. But there's also an element of choice involved. Sometimes, consciously, when I'm driving, for example, I can kind of put it aside and be very angry or filled with rage. Not ever to be acted upon, but as I say, there's an element of choice. But I choose to create an environment that I live within. I call that love in a bookstore.
Thank you.
For me, a big part of love is empathy, being able to see from someone else's point of view and kind of stand in their shoes. And it's also about like having a caring and a generosity towards others and like trusting others. And it's not always like easy to do, but yeah, I think love is like, it's challenging to to actually do and be, but it's really worth it.
Thank you.
Hi. Hey. I'm going to kind of go maybe a little bit of a different path with this. But to kind of like piggyback off of the whole vulnerability thing, because I still am somewhat of a cynic, sometimes I feel like the word love is overused. Like, to give an example, like someone, and this is probably something that I have to work on within myself, but like, for example, someone like I've never met, for example, they would say, oh, hello, love. And because of my cynicism, I tend to question, well, you've never met me. How am I in love? And when I started to have that cynicism in my mind and question that, I started looking up the definition of love. And one of the definitions is to have, you know, that feeling of connection towards, you know, all things. And that kind of like helped me to understand a little more why someone would, you know, use that. But for me, love, I guess I always connected it towards someone who I was very close to. And I'm slowly learning to expand on that definition, so.
Great, thank you.
Hi Sharon, come over here.
Thank you.
So, I see love as our basic state of being, so kind of the ground of who we truly are. Whether you call it Buddha nature, basic goodness, basic aliveness, Christ nature, whatever one wants to call it. So I think it's our birthright, what we were born with, and then because of things that happen, we start shutting it down.
Okay, thank you.
I think love for me, as you know, growing up was the word that comes to mind is confusing. It was a very confusing term because from a very young age, probably I was 11, 12 years old, I knew I was gay. And this was in the 70s, very confusing time. So that closet door literally was opened and closed a million times before I finally figured out what love was. And then, you know, I guess in my late 20s, early 30s, I finally came out and I said, okay, so love for me at that point was a sense of strength. You know, I finally was able to say it to myself and then to others. And now it just feels like so natural, and it's just a sense of connectivity and honesty, I think, for me. That's very important.
Thank you.
For me, I find love to be an evolving definition. And it's, I have no idea what it's going to be tomorrow or next month, but right now, that's all I have is God is love. And that's what I believe. And I find that through mindfulness. Of course, what I really like, the definition of, just the definition, is what I believe Robert Frost said. And he said that love is the irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired.
Oh, that Robert Frost.
Good morning. At the bank this morning, I was behind someone who was asked, may I help you with anything else? And her response was, no, mi amor. And I was struck at that moment that here in Miami, I hear that so often from women. Mi amor, mi vida. And it's this acknowledgement that love really is every day. It's every day, it's everywhere. It is profound, and it is also incredibly basic.
Great, thank you.
Hi. For me, I experience it mostly in my heart. I feel like an expansion and a sensation, and what I notice, especially through meditation, is when I give up my resistance to life and my fighting, and that it just happens on its own. It's like what they said over there, it's the ground of it. It seems like it comes from the background or from above, and it just flows out. And the mind is expansive and quiet, and the heart is just open. It's deep feeling, and I really like the way that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about touching deeply. So for me, it's about touching deeply with my heart, my awareness, everything that's arising. You know, whether I'm angry with my child, or whether I'm, meditating or cooking a nice meal. But it's a very felt, palpable thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi Sharon, I'm over here. My name is Tara, nice to finally meet you. I did really enjoy what you had shared with us about how love is, it's not really a feeling, it's an ability. I saw a lot of other people take out their journals and their pens. So I just wanted to follow up with that. So I definitely agree, because I think so much of, at least my experience with love, is being able to be in it and behave in a way and when you're not feeling it. Because a lot of how we define love is a feeling, and it's when it's convenient and when it feels good and when it feels right. And there's a lot of times where we don't feel it, but having that ability to show it, even when we're not feeling it, even when we are feeling rage, to still be able to show feelings of love, for me is a very important aspect of what love really means.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Anybody else? And we'll go on.
Sharon, I guess this is getting a little stale, but my experience of the break was a very deep opening up from the inside, and I guess I fell in love with everything I saw: grass, trees, bamboo, wooden slats, broken pieces of debris, all the people, and then I realized it's a place, it's a deep opening inside, and that didn't take much, just a little quiet, and that deep space opened and opened and opened. I wasn't sure how far it would go, but that's what love, I guess, is to me. It's a deep opening space inside with which we experience what's around us, whatever that might be. So today it's this. But I did have a funny experience. For years, I heard a sound by the bamboo over there, which I thought was a fountain. And it's really not. It's an illusion. It's the bamboo covering up fans.
Oh.
And the fan hum sound sounded like beautiful water. So I love that.
It's great. Well, thank you all so much. I will say, in all honesty, you're the most extraordinary group I've ever asked that question to. Yeah, I'm going to get you a microphone if you're going to speak. Thank you.
Okay, very quick. I mean, I agree with everything that people said, and we can spend days trying to define love. But for me, it was, when I was growing up, I was very confused. I didn't really know what love was. And if I thought it was like, I clinged to something and that was love. But one of the things that I'm learning more and more with my practices is that love needs to be cultivated. Self-compassion needs to be cultivated. And when I really feel it, I can now cling to it. I have to give it away. And another thing also is that I grew up with conditional love.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm learning more and more with my practices, it's not conditional. Love is unconditional to self and to others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I wish I was writing a book on love right at this point. You're great. Really, thank you so much. I did try to crowdsource my book in a way. I asked people through social media. I had a lot of meetings with people in different places, just groups asking for their stories, their insights about love. I should say that, my background, when I went to India to study meditation, and the context in which I found it, in terms of the most direct instruction, was within the Buddhist tradition. But the very first night of my first retreat, the teacher, it was an intensive 10-day retreat, that's how I learned how to meditate. That's how I began. When I walked in to that compound, I'd never meditated before for a moment. And there I was in this 10-day retreat. But we all kind of tended to learn in that context in those days. And the first night of the first retreat, as I'm going through, the teacher said the Buddha did not teach Buddhism, the Buddha taught a way of life. So even though I will tend to say things like, well, according to the Buddhist psychology and in the Buddhist tradition, it's, we come together or we explore these things, not in any way with it being about Buddhism, it's about ourselves and about the nature of life and what's real for us, and however one wants to express it. It's just that I went to India when I was 18, which was a good long time ago now, and so I'm so used to that way of languaging and expression that it's the one that I use. So with that prelude, I'll say in the Buddhist teaching, there is this word metta. Somebody referred to it, M-E-T-T-A, 2 T's. And the common translation is loving kindness, which I think I certainly use it, and it conveys a lot of the sense of that word, but it can be a sort of odd term. You don't necessarily expect to go to a restaurant, for example, and overhear the conversation at the next table with somebody using the word loving kindness. And so, because the word is not necessarily associated with day-to-day life, my concern is that it might make the quality itself seem somewhat removed from day-to-day life and somewhat arcane and sanctimonious or precious in the negative sense of the word. So I've also had translators and scholars say to me, just say love. Stop being so cutesy and using this term like loving kindness. Nobody knows quite what it means, Just say love. But love, of course, is a very complex term for us. Sometimes when we say love, it is I love ice cream, where sometimes we say love, it is frankly a medium of exchange. I will love you as long as you love me in return, as long as you show it in this way, as long as the following 15 conditions are met. I once said that in front of a group, and someone in the group called out, only 15 conditions? I will love you as long as however many conditions are met. I will love myself as long as I never make a mistake. So we know how fragile, how breakable that sense of love is, because it's usually not long, right? The literal translation of the word metta is friendship, and that I also have some difficulty with, in that for me friendship implies conviviality, like let's go to the movies together, let's have a meal together. And the quality of metta as described is like an inner state of freedom. But it may not imply one particular action, right? It's like we know there's such a thing as tough love. We know there's such a thing as fierce compassion. Out of a beautiful and genuine state of love and compassion, your best guess of the most suitable or skillful way to act in a certain context, at a certain moment in time, might be saying no. It might be being pretty fierce or intense. It might be having a strong boundary. But within, there's not that kind of rejection or dismissal or kind of giving up, you know, like hating on somebody. I asked my friend George Mumford, who's been a coach, a mindfulness coach for different sports teams, most fully probably would be the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers when they won their championships. More recently, he worked in New York with the New York Knicks, and that didn't go over well in New York every time we were together giving a talk about, oh really, you know. But anyway, he was quite interesting. So I said to him once, he had a book that came out called The Mindful Athlete, so when that came out, we were doing some talks together, and I said to him, do you use the word mindfulness? Because he's been doing this for a very long time. And he said, now I can. You know, because of the science and the research and all of that, now I can say mindfulness. So I said, do you use a word like compassion or loving kindness? He said, no, that's too much. But I knew he must do something along those lines, you know, as a value, as a thing to consider and cultivate. And he said, I said, how do you say it? So he thought for a moment and he said, I tell them, don't be hating. You know, don't be hating on yourself, don't be hating on others. And I thought, okay, you know, I'll take that. So it is this inner state, and I think we don't serve the truth of love, we don't serve the reality of our experience when we think it must be expressed in a certain way. You must say yes, you must give them the money, you must let them just keep behaving the way they are, right? It's not like that. There's discernment, there's assessment, there's past experience, there's intuition, there's, you know, many, many things that feed into our choice, our decision of how to act. Saying yes, saying no, whatever it might be. But within, we don't need to be entangled in the kind of divisions or disconnection that we can. So it's an inner state of freedom. That's why, even though it is the literal translation, I tend not to use friendship because of the associations I have with friendship. And the word I do tend to use is connection, which came up many times. A powerful sense or recognition of connection with ourselves, with others, and ultimately with all of life. I think we experience it in many different ways. Sometimes it is profoundly a feeling or an emotion. Sometimes it's not even that. It's a shift in the worldview. It's a sense of inclusion. It's a recognition that, oh, maybe everybody does want to be happy, which is part of what the Buddha would say, that everybody wants to be happy. We all, in a profound sense, not just, you know, having a good parking spot or something, but a sense of belonging, a sense of being a part of something greater than our usually limited sense of self. We all want that. And we get so many messages and myths are fed to us about where happiness is to be found. But what is the truth of our experience? You know, we have the chance, which is also pretty great, to examine and explore. I used the example the other night when I was teaching here about, I once really upset this young woman. I was co-teaching a 6-day seminar. And the first night, talking about this, I used the phrase, it's a dog-eat-dog world, which is a lot of what we're taught, you know, even in entertainment. I don't usually, for example, watch reality TV much at all. But if I'm at somebody's house and they are very enthusiastic about something and they have it on, then I watch it. And I remember I watched this cooking show with a friend once, and I was appalled, It's like when someone was being sent away, instead of like, well, your souffle, it was good, but it was sort of standard, I think you could be a little more inventive with spices, and good luck next time. It was take your knives and go. And I was like, oh my God. That is like awful. It's like, you don't deserve to be alive. It's like watching, for me, it's like watching constant rejection. And I think this is entertainment. Like, wow, what are we taught? We're taught that the more we can put someone else down, the better we'll feel about ourselves. But is that our actual experience? That's the whole point of mindfulness, is that we can tell if it's true or not, because we can see for ourselves. But anyway, back to it's a dog-eat-dog world. So I said, what a phrase, Like, that is where true happiness is to be found. This young woman came up, took the microphone, and she said, she was very upset with me. She said, my whole life I thought the phrase was, it's a dog-eat-dog world, like D-O-G-G-Y, D-O-G, like puppies and meadows, It's like, she said, dog-eat-dog world, what a hard phrase. So 6 days later, at the end of the whole event, she got back up to the microphone and she said, I've decided I'm not going to live in a dog-eat-dog world. I'm going to live in a dog-eat-dog world. But that doesn't make us stupid, So sometimes that experience of metta is just that shift of worldview. We feel like, oh, we're approached by, it was a very New York example, but we're approached by a stranger in an elevator, which is not really, done for conversation, and you actually get there, and you listen, and you kind of wish them well, with their day. It doesn't cost you anything. It's just not the common habit, at least when you're my age, because we grew up that way. And even now, if I'm in an elevator in New York, somebody starts talking to me, I kind of like, what do you want? Because that's the visceral conditioning, but then I get there. It's that moment when we open, when we actually listen, when we can wish someone well in a simple way, and then they go on and maybe we never see them again. So that sense of metta is not about the structure a relationship will take, it's not about the form, it's not about the commitment, it's about that connection. It doesn't imply a lot of what we think it will imply. So I did all these groups to try to hear people's stories and insights. The first group that I did was in New York City, and we were just talking, and there were at least 2 moments that were very interesting that came out of that group. The first was a woman talking about her complicated relationship with her young adult son. And she said to me, I think you should call the book Real Love Simple But Not Easy. Okay, that was interesting. And then this man raised his hand and he said, most people think of a good relationship as 50-50. My dog and I, we're 100-100. And I love that story, but then I was very late turning in the book, which was all my fault, but I was very late turning in the book, and finally I was going to turn it in, and I was in England about to sit a retreat myself as a participant the next day. The last deadline I got was August 1st, a couple of years ago. And this was like July 31st, I was really proud of it. 2 years late, 1 day early. This kind of day. And then I thought of that story, the dog story, and I thought, I wonder if that stayed in there, well, these editings and changes that have happened in this whole period of time. And I did a search and it was not in there anymore. So I quickly typed in and I pressed send. That was the last thing that went in there. And in the course of doing all these groups, the last group that I did was in Barre, Massachusetts, which is where the Insight Meditation Society is. And there's like a resident community of people on staff or in the community. So we got together and somebody there said to me, my whole life I've been taught and I believe that loving somebody is a supreme, rare, exalted kind of relationship. But yeah, you like everybody. That's just like taken for granted. That's just ordinary. And he looked at me and he said, you're reversing it. You're saying we can love everybody in the way I'm using the word, right? Have a sense of connection. And not really like anybody much at all, you know? And I thought about it and I said, you're right, I am. Because that's the point, you know, in the cultivation of these states, and they are cultivated, that's a very important point. States like love or loving kindness, compassion, certainly within Eastern psychology, they're considered trainable. Not because we force a feeling or we try to pretend anything, but because they are so dependent on how we pay attention. Are you really there? Are you really listening? Are you open? Are you holding on to some assumption about someone you've never even met? Or assumption about yourself, which may be really old and really damaging. And not true, if it ever was. So we have the possibility of really connecting deeply to ourselves, to all of life, and we may not like many people, may not like anybody, and it'll be okay. So it's confounding, it's so different. And that was the last group that I did, you know, and so really, the evolution of the book is really what we're going to do here together. Looking at loving kindness or love, for a better word, toward ourselves, and how that's appropriate, that's meaningful, that's not something that's, you know, like narcissism or being selfish or self-centered. This quality of metta and associated qualities like compassion, which we'll also explore, they're considered qualities of generosity. It's like generosity of the spirit. And that's got to come from somewhere to be in its full flowering. You know, if you feel depleted, shattered, exhausted, overcome, just burned out, and you're trying to care about somebody else or take care of somebody else or make a difference in the world, it's not, it could be done, but it's not sustainable. It's also not coming from the best place. So it becomes like an act of obligation, or, you know, it's just your job, it doesn't mean anything, or whatever it is, right? So the best kind of generosity is said to come from a sense of inner abundance, or at least inner sufficiency. So this offering of loving kindness to ourselves is not to be lazy or forget everybody else. It is the very, that's the ground, you know, that's how we experience that ground, which then can spill over into genuinely, I mean, we know what it's like, right? Like you're exhausted. You feel like there's nothing left inside you. And somebody comes and starts telling you their very sad story, and all you can think is, go away. No, please go away. You may not show it, but it's really what's going on. But it doesn't have to be that way. So one of the great controversies is that state of sufficiency, wholeness, abundance, even out of which our generosity of the spirit it doesn't have to be material generosity, but that real presence and caring. Can it be cultivated? Can it be trained? And in the West, that makes people a little squeamish, you know? It sounds sort of cold or weird. But again, in Eastern psychology or Buddhist psychology, absolutely they can be trained, and they need to be trained, or cultivated, or nourished in some way. Whatever exists as a potential within us, it needs to be nourished and brought forth. And it is said that that potential is never destroyed. No matter what you go through, no matter what you may do, it may be covered over, it usually is, and hard to find and hard to trust, but it's there. And that's the basis upon which we practice meditation, is to return to that sense of connection with that potential and to bring it forth, help it flower. Help it be generative and abundant in that way. So we start with some exploration of love toward ourselves. We move on to exploration of love toward another, whether it's a partner or a child or a parent or a friend or your dog, whatever it is, whomever it is. And then we move on from there to an exploration of love for all beings everywhere, all of life. And when I was talking to a friend, and here, remember, you may not like somebody, and you're maybe committed, very strongly committed, to fighting, to disagreeing, to taking a stand that's different. But in your heart, do you need to be harboring that kind of hatred? And what's the consequence of that for you? So these are not easy questions. These are pretty profound questions, but from the first time I heard about metta, I was just, the allure of the possibility of really having that kind of inner freedom in relationship to myself, to so many different beings in my life, and to all of life was very, very powerful. It's certainly not the only way by any means that we cultivate these states, but it's a pretty powerful way to look at cultivating these states. There's also, in terms of love, which also came to my mind hearing some of you, this very beautiful passage from the Buddha who said, develop a mind so filled with love it resembles space, which cannot be painted, cannot be marred, cannot be ruined. Develop a mind so filled with love it resembles space, like that open, that unconfined, that free. So if someone was standing in the middle of this room throwing paint around in the air, there's nowhere in the space for the paint to land. It's not going to, whatever the color chose it, it's not going to mar the space. Develop a mind so filled with love it resembles space. Now that's not very Valentine's Day-ish, like I got you some space. It doesn't make any sense. But think about that for a moment. That free, that unconfined. So we start with an exploration of loving kindness for ourselves. And sometimes we just have to get over the thought that this is selfish, that this is, at least undertake it as an experiment. So I actually talk in the book, and it's part of the kind of practice we're going to do before we break for lunch, and I'll give some suggestions for metta during lunch. I try to use metta now and then, at least, so that, as a term, so that, it's not just sort of constantly loving kindness or love. What does that mean? So, connection. So talk in the book, I make this suggestion of if you have an inner critic that you find sort of repeating, like same sort of critical voice coming back and back and back again, maybe sort of mean-spirited even, you know, not like an intuition like, oh, that could use some work, or, you know, but a pretty derogatory voice, like that judge on the cooking show. Maybe give it a name, give it even a wardrobe, give it a persona, and then see how you relate to it, and reform it. Even before that, we can see how you speak to yourself in the exercise that we did. When your mind wanders away from the breath, how are you with yourself? How harsh are you? How punitive are you? Because in fact, we often think that self-compassion is being lazy. It's losing all standards. It's not having a drive or a sense of excellence. But really, it's not like that. It's a really effective way of actually getting something done or making a change and so on. And so one of the forces that makes that kind of difficult is if you do have a repetitive visitor. So I said, you know, give it a persona, and with apologies to any Lucys in the room, I say that, which is true, I've named my inner critic Lucy. From the Peanuts comic strip, the character in the Peanuts comic strip. Because I wanted a friend of ours had rented a house for many of us to move into and do a retreat in. And when I went into the bedroom that had been set aside for me, I saw someone had left a cartoon on the desk from the Peanuts comic strip. And in the first frame of the cartoon, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown. And she says, you know what your problem is, Charlie Brown? The problem with you is that you're you. In other words, if you really knew who you were, it would be a pretty sad story. And poor Charlie Brown says, well, what in the world can I do about that? And then Lucy says, I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem. And somehow, whenever I was going by that desk, my eye would fall right on that line. The problem with you is that you're you. Because that Lucy voice had been so predominant in my earlier life. And I really saw as well that my years of mindfulness practice had given me some tools. So, and actually it happened very quickly after I saw the cartoon. Something great happened for me, and my first thought was, it's never going to happen again. And I responded with, hi Lucy. And my favorite form of it was, chill out Lucy. Just chill. Now that is different than, you're right Lucy, you're always right, I'm worth nothing. It's also different than, oh my God, I can't believe Lucy is still here. That is so dreadful. I've been meditating for, 3, 4, 5, 45 years. And Lucy is still here. I went to therapy, I spent all that money, and Lucy's still here. And I'm such a failure. This is so awful, right? Those are the two extremes. One is falling into a state and just letting it take over. You're right, Lucy, you're always right. The other extreme is the struggle, hating what we're feeling, being ashamed of it, trying to push it away, trying to deny it, which doesn't work in the end. So mindfulness is described often as the state in the middle, where we neither get overcome or defined by something, or struggle against it and dislike it. We just can say, hi Lucy, this is what's happening right now. Chill out, Lucy. in a really oversimplified form of Tibetan practice, they would basically say, invite Lucy in for dinner. Keep an eye on her. Don't let her have the run of the house, because that's dangerous, you know? But you don't have to be so afraid of what you feel, of what's coming up. You don't have to be so freaked out about it. It's what's appearing in the moment. It's okay. In a way, it's like saying your awareness and your compassion are stronger than this visitor, even if Lucy visits a lot. So I once suggested that to a group, and somebody in the group didn't like it. So I said, how about inviting Lucy in for a cup of tea? And they said, how about a cup of tea to go? I said, okay, that's the extent of your hospitality, that's okay. But this is really important for us because we do tend to have a lot of conditioning, a lot of habitual patterns. Some of them are wonderful, you know, they're onward leading, these narratives, these stories, they bring us together. We get reminded of how much is really possible for us. But others are pretty limiting and they hold us back. And they keep us from actualizing that potential for connection, for love, and so on. And we want to be able to see them, not to annihilate them, you know, because we're in this terrible fight, but because we don't need to go there, where we can be aware and when we have a different sense of perspective. So we really start with looking at ourselves. And I also say that in the context of meditation practice, which is a training. And with that degree of focus and introspection, really you see a whole lot. And of course it doesn't have to be in meditation. Some process of getting to know ourselves and our interior world more fully will reveal a lot. So twice since I've been in Miami, I've been asked to tell this story, and I will tell the story again. Which is, you know, as I said, I never really meditated before when I went into this intensive 10-day retreat, and then I did a succession of 10-day retreats. And I was also 18 years old, and had a really difficult childhood. I was in a lot of emotional pain, but I didn't really know it because I was also very naive about all the, you know, shadings of what I was really feeling. But it all started coming up in the course of doing the meditation. So I'm still very close to many people who were at my first retreat. I'm somewhat famous amongst them for having marched up to see Goenka, the teacher, and looking him in the eye and saying, I never used to be an angry person before I started meditating. Thereby laying exactly where I felt it belonged, which was on him, of course. But what was really going on, of course, was that I'd been hugely angry, and I hadn't known it. So we tend to think of meditation in popular culture as like a vacation, you know? It's all serene, it's all lovely, and maybe you get a little sleepy in the beginning, but you know, you break through that, and then it's just like peace and bliss and peace and bliss and peace and bliss if you're doing it right. And it's just not true. Sometimes there's peace and bliss, sometimes it's just like, oh, another breath. Sometimes there's fear or anger that will come up, and it's all good because it's all workable. Remember, balance is the key, right? And having a more balanced awareness of what our experience is. Maybe we feel we're losing the balance, and so we work with picking up energy, or we work with infusing more loving kindness toward ourselves. Or, you know, this is really the whole process of an ongoing practice, but there's no wrong experience to be had. You know, and many, many things will arise, and it's actually kind of amazing and interesting just to see the range of what is possible, these exhilarating, amazing, opening states and some really difficult states as well. So I'd say the most common question one is ever asked as a meditation teacher in one form or another is this normal? You know, yeah, it is, whatever it is. It is. The question is, how should I work with it so that it's onward leading instead of being some kind of obstacle? And that is a body of knowledge that's actually known. So we're not looking for love as a objectified state. We're looking for it as part of how we are relating to ourselves and whatever we're experiencing, right? And that way you can almost say it's a part of mindfulness in a secret, sneaky sort of way. Not love, you know, Valentine's Day love, like I am the greatest, you know, person ever. Which might be an interesting exercise as a balance to the usual opposite, but more in the sense of just a basic kindness. One of the suggestions we make is if you see your own fear, anger, jealousy, the kinds of qualities we don't necessarily like to see within us arising, that instead of calling those qualities bad and wrong and terrible and awful, call them what they are, which is states of suffering. That's what they are. And see what happens, what shifts in your relationship to them. So, beginning at lunchtime and then through the afternoon, and tomorrow we'll shift to a more formal loving kindness practice, but for now, you know, I'd say let's go back to using the breath as kind of the anchor for our attention, and see what it's like when you're sort of waking up from the trance, like where I've been, in terms of how you speak to yourself, and also see what if Lucy comes. Let's just say. How are you with that critical voice? Can you find a balanced recognition that's even as far as a cup of tea, you know? Maybe that's a big cup of tea I have. Well, maybe Lucy can have a bigger one. Let's go. How are you with the various feelings and thoughts and so on that arise? You don't have to do that extensively and try to figure out where they've come from, but in effect, it's like, what's the tone of voice in which you are recognizing this anger, or this fear, or this joy, or this delight? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, let's get it. Let your attention settle into your body. Settle on the feeling of the breath, wherever it's clearest for you, and rest. If you find your attention has wandered, and you realize that, see how you speak to yourself. And if it's a harsh voice, see if you can soften it. And then return your attention to the feeling of the breath. If a powerful emotion should arise, see how you are with it. Just to observe, and then come back to the feeling of the breath. And if you find your attention has wandered, remember you can always, always let go and begin again. Nothing's ruined, nothing's lost. That actually is the training in letting go and beginning again. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. Okay. Does anybody have something they feel really, really moved to talk about now before lunch? That's getting my microphone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I've been grappling.
I thought you were going to say I'm Lucy, and I was like,
Lisa.
I'm so sorry.
I do have real hair. I've been grappling since you said love is an ability versus love is a feeling. And I've spent a lot of time sort of half here and half there trying to figure out how to say it concisely. I was born, as all babies, with the ability to love. Love meaning, to me, the connection where your heart expands, you see the mother. You see a butterfly for the first time back to the world. I don't know that you or anyone could teach me that ability. I think for me, love is a feeling that I have been trained not to let myself So I was really caught with the idea of how do you cultivate love or train love if it's an ability versus me thinking that I need to be untrained or from all those barriers that are in front of my feeling.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really saying the same thing. It's also saying the same thing of your neighbor, you know, that it's a ground, it's something. So, you know, maybe we would say the potential, you know, doesn't need to be found outside of ourselves because it exists inside ourselves. And that's the mistake we usually make. You know, so I think what Peter had just wrote down in real life was saying with that line was, it's not a commodity, you know, that is in the hands of someone else to give us or take away. And I found it very powerful because it did point me back to my own potential, which also points us back to our own responsibility. Like if we want love in a conversation or an encounter, you can't insist that the other person bring it into the room. That'd be nice, and sometimes it's amazing when it happens, but ultimately it's within us. Because how we respond, what we even see, what we take in, is really depending on, you could say what we've cultivated or what we've let go of, however, you know, direction you want to talk about it, because you could be in an amazing, loving situation and not take it in, right? I think of Ramdas, who's actually an old friend of mine, sort of a spiritual figure in the 60s. He was at my first retreat in India as a participant, and he was kind of like the patriarch, you know, he'd already been fired from Harvard, and he had been to India before, and he was no longer Richard Alpert, he was Ramdas, and you know, looking back, I was, oh God, he was like 39 or something, you know, but he was, you know, that kind of figure, and you know, we've been friends ever since 1971, and then I forget, it must be close to 20 years ago now, where he had a very severe stroke, and first he wasn't expected to live, and then he lived, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since, and his speech, which had really been like his golden touch, is like very clear and bright, but slow, you know, sometimes very slow. And he's teaching. He doesn't leave Maui. He lives on Maui, which is not so bad. I mean, it may mean less to you in Miami than it means to me from New England. But he's teaching, and so one year I was there teaching with him, but he was speaking, I was sitting in the back of the room, and he said, basically, his whole life up until the stroke, he had a real problem with people, with taking in the love, and with having people help him, which I would say, knowing him all these years, was absolutely true. It just was his personality, and he said, and then I had the stroke, and all of a sudden I had to receive, as well as be the person giving. And he said that was the hardest thing of all. Harder than change in, you know, speech and not being able to travel, you know, so easily and all those things. And he said that was the hardest thing of all and the most liberating. And he said one of my famous books was called How Can I Help? And he said, now I want to write a book called How Can You Help Me? You know, which I thought was great, you know, so, and he's the most loving person, because somehow it's like cycling through, but the real barrier had been receiving, not in giving. So You know, there is something, we can be surrounded by love but not take it in. There's so many possibilities, and they're all just habits, conditioning. So whether you think of it as dissolving the force of the conditioning or seeing it quickly, it's like saying Lucy how to see, you know, or you see it as cultivating awareness and compassion so you can respond to Lucy differently. It's like the same thing from different directions. I did get into real trouble with this editor about love is not a feeling, because she thought of it as a feeling. And I understand that, you know, that is also true, but it's ultimately got to come down to our own ability to receive it, to express it, and working with everything that seems to be in the way. Because we can, and look at how amazing that is. So, okay, so we are going to break for lunch. Again, if you could think about having this room be quiet, because we're giving an hour and a half, because some people will, I don't know how far you have to go to get the food that you want. And that means that for some people you'll have a lot of time, and you may want to come back here and just practice or make a nest and lie down or something. As you go out, I want to ask you, obviously you're going to be speaking, although not hopefully right here. Every now and then, as you are moved to, I'd really like you, either with yourself or you see somebody else, something like that, to silently just use a phrase like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may I be happy. Maybe you start to see yourself, you know, getting agitated because they don't have gluten-free bread in the place you went, or something, you know. That would be a good time to send yourself a little metta, just for a moment. So we're talking about kind of playing, you know, like, oh, may I be peaceful, you know, may I settle down and accept things the way they are. And this is gift giving, right? You're not asking or imploring somebody to grant you happiness or peace. In this particular practice, you're offering. You're offering to yourself, you're offering to others. So maybe that person waiting on your table looks a little hairy, you know, doesn't need to be happy. But it needs to be silent, right? You know, it's so weird. And so have fun. Just kind of do a little bit of it now and then. Okay, see you at 2.